I'm Algenon Cash, and you're locked in. In this episode, I'm joined by someone who truly embodies what it means to serve with purpose. Ned Erickson is the Community Affairs Director at Piedmont Federal, a hometown bank that's been serving our community since 1903. But in today's conversation, we're going beyond banking. We're talking about housing, neighborhood equity, community partnerships, and the role that financial institutions can play in transforming lives. If you've ever wondered how a bank can be more than a bank, you'll want to stay tuned. Ned, thank you for locking in with me, man. I think this is your inaugural visit to the show.
Yeah, man, I'm thrilled to be here with you, Algenon. It's an honor, and I'm humbled by the opportunity. It's gonna be a great conversation, I'm sure.
It will. I will. I know you and I randomly got to know one another. This will be a shameless plug for your coffee shop over in Old Salem, but we
Bring it,
rarely
man.
randomly got to know each other because I started hanging out at Lot 63 in Old Salem, and come to find out you're one of the partners that started that venture. I guess before we jump into your role at Piedmont Federal, maybe plug the coffee shop a little bit.
Sure. So I'm not originally from Winston-Salem, but I've been here since 1997. And for those of you who do are familiar with this part of the world, Old Salem is a historical representation of what life was like, back in the 1700s, around the turn of the 18th century. And it's been such a cool treasure for our city to have something like that that's so historic that lifts up our legacy here. But the one thing I felt like was missing was a community connection place inside of that historic area. And so I was given the opportunity to dream a little bit of what that might look like in terms of creating a third space, if you know that concept from this kind of old Starbucks concept of creating that space that's not work, it's not home, but that place of gathering. And so we dreamed up what that might look like at Lot 63. And, you know, really the best way to connect with people is over a drink, whether it's coffee or a beer or wine, and some tasty treats. And so that's what we have created. And it's been really wonderful to watch uh, really our community come together and create, uh, be able to co-create with us what that space really does look like. So folks like you who, have been able to riff off of what we've created to have meaningful conversations and connections with people. It's pretty cool.
No, I really enjoy it. I was actually there yesterday and meeting a friend from Greensboro and having a beer in the afternoon. And the cafe is always very lively, and it's cool to be a part of the Old Salem experience. You know,
Mhm.
I'm living now in West Salem, so I just love this part of our community and this part of downtown. And thank you for your investment and everything you're trying to do to bring a lively energy to Old Salem. And I encourage my audience, if you haven't visited Lot 63, they're still relatively new and just went through a little bit of construction and expanding their private area. But Trent told me the food will be back on deck here in the next week or so, and
Yep.
so I encourage my audience to go visit Lot 63 if you haven't done so. You know, Ned, during the day, Monday through Friday, you wear a different type of cape. You're over at Piedmont Federal, which is a homegrown bank here in Winston-Salem. Your role is community affairs director. You know, for my audience that may not understand what a community affairs director does, let's start there. Maybe just talk a little bit about what the day-to-day looks like for you, Ned.
Sure. Yeah. I'm still figuring this out myself, but I describe my job basically I have three main responsibilities. One is in terms of Um, I oversee our sponsorships and grants and volunteerism and just those nuts and bolts of what a company does to give back to the community. We have a phrase at Piedmont Federal that giving back is who we are. And so part of my role is to put, flesh on that phrase that we're actually giving back. And so we do that from showing up with people, showing up with our resources. And that's a portion of what I do. And then the second bucket is what I would describe as social responsibility or corporate citizenship. And so one of the things that really is important, as we are the oldest established bank here in this community. We've been around for 123 years. And so in many ways, we built this community or alongside the folks are our depositors. And so it's really important that we think about what it looks like to be a steward of this place. And so we have three main pillars that we use. Obviously we can't solve all the world's problems, but we think about people, place, and planet. Those are our three big pillars. And so I can work through those backwards. Planet, we really have made a decision as a bank to be environmentally friendly, environmentally forward in the way that we're thinking about how to be caretakers of this world. We all live here in the Piedmont Triad. We want this place to be a place with clean water and clean air, and where we are participating in reducing our carbon footprint and doing the things as a an energy consumer to be responsible in the way that we do that. And so we we really are trying to take a lead. We've actually become a certified green bank through the Piedmont Environmental Alliance, and so we are part of the Green Business Network, and just honored to be in that space of really trying to push our community into a future that's going to be healthy and green. So that's Planet Place. We were started with four families coming together to pool their money to create a mortgage. And so from the very beginning of our bank, we have been about housing and getting people into homes. And so we really feel like it is our job to take a leadership position in what many people would consider is the greatest challenge in our community, which is affordable housing. And so we have several initiatives. It's not a one size fits all solution. We're going to need to create a truly comprehensive solution to this challenge. And so it's really important that we as a bank think about all the ways that we can address affordable housing, those issues, whether that's and I can list off several of our initiatives, but it's really vital to, I think, our future that we make sure that people in this community have homes that they can live in and be proud of. And then people, we obviously that's a broad subject. What we're really focused on is an inclusive economy. We want to for those of you who are familiar, Winston-Salem has been identified as one of the worst places in the country when it comes to economic mobility. So people born in poverty um, are not have a low likelihood of getting out of poverty in their lifetime, and we want to change that narrative. And so we're really focused on workforce development, economic mobility, financial literacy, training people up to be able to move up the economic ladder and have better lives.
You talked a little bit about the bank's founding and some of the history of Piedmont Federal Bank going all the way back to 1903. I think that when people think about Winston-Salem and they think about banking, names like BB&T come to mind, which is now Truist. Wachovia comes to mind, which is now Wells Fargo. Maybe even for some, a Southern Community might come to mind, which is now First Horizon, I guess you could say. Not a lot of people would think about Piedmont Federal. So, how do you help people to understand the role of some of our smaller community banks versus the larger, more well-known banks? And then over this 100-plus-year history that Piedmont Federal has had, talk a little bit about how the mission has evolved and the change in landscape of our financial world.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, so we are a mutual. So we are owned by our depositors. So we don't have shareholders. We're not beholden to outsiders of this community, making sure that our quarterly reports, are always in the black and things like that. We're fortunate as a bank that we have never gone through a financial crisis, even through the Depression. We always were able to secure people's deposits. But because we are owned by the people who entrust us with their resources, we we feel like it's our responsibility to be good caretakers of that, but also to use those resources to support other people. So Algenon, you might have a deposit relationship. You might have your a checking account or a CD with us, and the little bit of money that we earn off of that, we'll use that to provide a mortgage for someone down the street. And the little bit of money we earn from that, we might be able to help a business start in this community. And so everything we do, it's like people helping people, and we end up getting to be that person connecting the dots to make sure that this whole community benefits, and that we all grow together and thrive together. So it truly is one of the more I've totally drunk in the Kool-Aid of community banking. It's one of the more beautiful things that exists in the world. That there actually is something that exists that is corporate greed is like the opposite of what we do at Piedmont Federal. We're really trying to do right by our depositors and then trying to do right by the little bit of profit we make to make a huge impact wherever we can do it. So
Yeah, when I think you, when I try to remind people when you think about banking, there are many subcategories, whether it's our credit unions and our smaller community banks and so many others. But I do think the general public often sort of puts all banks into the same category. And so they might think that the behaviors of a Wells Fargo may also be the behavior of a Piedmont Federal. But as you and I know, there's a big stark contrast for how both those banks operate. But then to your point, who they're beholden to can a lot of times make a significant difference. You talked a little bit about housing, and I know housing is a major, major issue in our region, really a major issue in our state, and perhaps maybe even a major issue across the country in most states currently. And I know here in North Carolina, the North Carolina Chamber just issued a report that we need somewhere around 700,000 units across North Carolina, which could generate somewhere around a $500 billion economic impact. So when you hear those kind of numbers, or even just the most recent announcement that we had here in the Triad with Jet Zero coming to the region, which that's going to be around 15,000 jobs, and a lot of those people that are going to be moving here need places to stay, which is also going to drive up the price of housing and rental rates even more than what we've seen in the last few years. So I guess specifically, what is some of the work that Piedmont Federal is doing right now that supports some of these affordable housing initiatives that you've raised?
yeah, so I actually just stepped out of a meeting, city meeting, um, called Thriving Together, where we're really trying to think about a holistic way of creating flourishing in our community. And in many ways, the affordable housing issue, like I said, is not there's not going to be one thing that we do, and it's actually way too big for public money to be able to solve it, private money to solve it. It's going to take all of us together figuring this thing out. And so, from a macro standpoint, I have the privilege and honor of being part of a task force to think about a comprehensive plan for our community. So part of it is a policy work, really trying to think through, in a very macro level, all of the things that we can do as a community to solve this. And some of that's making sure that we have the right state legislation, have the right municipal legislation, that we really solve some of the zoning issues. And then from a macro standpoint, how can we really leverage the resources that we have in the best way? Whether that's through court, construction loans on our part, we can do things of that nature to move things forward. But we're also part of a group that is building out a fund for our city. So you'll hear more about this, but the community is hoping to raise somewhere along the lines of $40 million to create gap funding, for projects. So a lot of times in affordable housing, the the projects don't fully pencil, and the last sort of 5% of a project needs a little. There's usually a gap between what makes a project pencil with a developer and what the project really needs. And so we're creating a fund that hopefully will replenish over time that be able to use to create that gap funding to really get shovel-ready projects shoveling dirt. So that's a big part of what we're doing. And then on a more micro level, we are working with individuals in this community pulling all the levers we can. We've got a great partnership with the Moravian Church, where we're creating an equitable housing coalition, where we're getting families into homes and figuring out through the great work that the county has with their first time home buyer program, with some other programs around the country to get those mortgages just in the right place that people are going to be able to thrive and not just survive. So really, it's everything. It's person by person, home by home, but it's also these big picture, getting construction projects off the ground, thinking about policy, working in the ways that we can to advocate from a local, state, and federal level to really um, get everyone rowing in the same direction to solve this incredibly difficult, challenging issue.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways that you can begin to address this housing issue is also through education. Right now across the country, 4 out of every 10 Americans are considered financially illiterate, meaning they can't balance a basic checkbook. I served on the North Carolina Council on Economic Education 2 terms, appointed by Governor McCrory, and we worked across the state with educators and also our legislators to make it imperative that our high school students had to have some level of financial literacy so that they basically knew how to make decisions with their money, how to save their money so that they can purchase that first home that they want. You talked about some of the underserved communities here in Winston-Salem, and I know I'm from East Winston and certainly understand the level of poverty that exists east of 52. Is there any work that Piedmont Federal is doing specifically to try to educate those communities around how to be more financially disciplined and have that knowledge and wisdom that's required to be financially prosperous?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, we have a wonderful team, and I'm honored to be a part of it, of folks who are in the community on a regular basis. We call it financial wellness, not financial literacy. That word literacy is triggering, in our opinion, because it's basically the opposite is illiterate, and we don't want people to. Um, I think it's really about wellness and really about really understanding how to be well, and in many ways we think about finances in healthcare terms. If you think about in your life, what are the things that are the most vulnerable parts of you? It's your actual physical health and it's your finances. Those are the most difficult things to just share openly with people. And so just like you have a doctor that hopefully you can be honest with about what's going on with your body. We want to create the kind of relationships with people in the community where people trust us like they trust their doctor so that we can really help them in the challenges that they're facing. Because in many, many ways, until you're able to have an honest conversation about kind of where you're at, you're never going to get it healthy. And so part of we do a lot of financial wellness classes, but we really are hoping those become open doors to having real conversations with people in the community. And that is pretty cool that part of my job and part of my mission that I get to fulfill for Piedmont Federal is to do that one-on-one work with folks to really help them become well. And to me, that is such an honor. And the word trust is the key word. And in many ways, um, the the good people of East Winston, the Hispanic community, many people have felt like banks are dangerous places where people are only out to get you and get your money. And we have to do the work of showing up and creating trust and building trust with people in the community so that we can have these important conversations with them to help them become well.
The types of initiatives we're talking about right now, I mean, it would seem like these are initiatives that are important to any local community bank, any financial institution. Are these initiatives that Piedmont Federal are partnering with other banks on, or are these just solely sole powered initiatives for your institution?
That's a great question. We have in in Winston-Salem, we have financial pathways, which their mission is to really expand and grow financial understanding in our community. The great people at Crisis Control Ministries have a poverty simulation and a couple of programs where they help people understand the challenges that people in our community face. And we are honored to participate in both of those wonderful nonprofits. And we're not the only bank that shows up in those spaces. So I wouldn't say that we're out there alone. And there's a lot of wonderful people doing a lot of wonderful things in our community. But I am really, it's easy for me to represent Piedmont Federal because it is the kind of bank that, um, I'm not just painting lipstick on a pig. We really mean what we are doing. And so it really is fun to be doing the good work of our community with the full support of everyone in our bank. So
You
I,
mentioned the folks over at Crisis Control, and I just finished wrapping up a project with them for their Hope du Jour campaign back
Mhm.
in May. And like you, Ned, I sit down, I meet and talk with a lot of different nonprofits, and listen to the various needs that people have of the community. And it just feels like nowadays, I'd say in the last year, maybe last year and a half, when you sit down with any nonprofit in Winston-Salem, they are really crying the blues here. And,
Mm.
funding is getting tighter and tighter. Feels like there might be more nonprofits than there are for-profits at this point in Winston-Salem. I may be wrong about that, but I swear it feels that way. You're probably talking to many of the same organizations I'm talking to day in day. What are you telling them right now? I mean, because whether it's Habitat for Humanity or Crisis Control, Salvation Army, I mean, you name your favorite nonprofit, and they're all crying the blues right now in Winston-Salem.
Yeah, well, yeah, there is definitely some headwinds, and some of those feel like they're out of our control, and I know they can feel really difficult. I actually, I, it's really helpful to have a background because when I talk to a nonprofit leader or board, I can definitely speak from a knowledge of intimate knowledge of what they're going through. And so, um, and very similar, Algenon, to probably what conversations you have with folks. The old system of just writing a grant and just living off a grant or having a big corporate owner you're gonna ride for a long time. Those days are gone. So really figuring out how to diversify your portfolio. Talk a lot about that and to help our nonprofits think about the different revenue streams that are at their disposal to kind of recreate the wheel in many ways because the old way of how a nonprofit operates is probably not going to exist 5 years from now. And so for those nonprofits that are going to be able to adapt, be creative, um, become collaborative. I think those are the ones that are going to survive, and the ones that, just keep trying to do the same thing the same way. I think there's probably going to be some of those nonprofits that won't be around in 5 years.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're right, Ned. And I think that the work you do is so critically important. Fortunately for me, when I first got involved professionally and with my career 20 something years ago, I came across great people in our community that encouraged me to get active in the community. And so I'm constantly trying to encourage my audience to stay active. And I know that you're someone that's also out doing the same thing. I guess let's end there and with the question of for someone who is listening to this conversation and wants to get more active in the community, what's your advice to them?
Oh man, thanks. That's a great question. One thing I love about our city is I would describe it that, if you think about a sheet of paper, there's those margins and there's um, there's like white space on the paper. And Winston-Salem still has a lot of white space. There's still opportunities for people who have ideas to try those ideas out. A guy like me who, never, I didn't have a lot of experience in the food and beverage business, gets an opportunity and gets to try it. And I love that we live in a city like that. So be encouraged. There are a lot of people in our community that want to help. And so I think probably the best piece of advice I could give anyone is um, go for it, but also make sure that you make sure you ask for help because there's help that's available. And don't feel like you have to do it all alone because it really takes community to do it. And so, um, I mean, even a bank, we would love to come alongside a dream business and help them figure it out. And so, um, I think there's a lot of opportunity here. So take courage in that way, ask for help, and get show up. There's lots of ways you can show up. And the more you show up, you're going to discover the other people who are also showing up, and you're going to develop community pretty quick.
I want to thank Ned Erickson for joining me and for the work he's doing to bridge the gap between finance and community development. It's encouraging to see local institutions like Piedmont Federal not only investing in people, but doing so with compassion and intention. If you want to learn more or get involved, check out their work online or visit your local branch. And until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, stay connected, and stay locked in. Thank y'all.